counselor and a consultant, and I'm here to share a little bit about my story with you.
Perfect. Wonderful.
So I'm going to work a little bit backwards because this is the first time I get to very publicly share a piece of my story that for 20 years had to remain hidden underground for safety reasons. And just in these past 5 years, the door has opened for me to be able to share more.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And what I recognized is that even though I've had 5 years to start getting comfortable sharing my story, I had 20 years of living in a pattern where that was not okay. And so I've asked myself many times, why has it been so hard now that I can share things to actually share them?
Yeah.
So it's been quite a practice of compassion, observation, deep exploring.
Sure, yeah.
And one of the things I told myself was, okay, let's get out of the comfort zone and start sharing things a little bit more personally. I'm very comfortable with public speaking. I do a lot of training, teaching, like public engagement, but it's always with a focus on something else.
Yeah, right.
And a focus on how I can help others. And in the meantime, I'm like hiding behind.
Right. I know that feeling very well.
Like, how can I be of service to you, but don't look behind the curtain?
Don't look at me, right?
Don't look at me. I don't want you to know that I have suffered as well. So thank you for making time to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the number one reason that not only my story, but my mother's story as well had to stay in hiding for so long is that about 25, 26 years ago, my mom and my dad had a really bad divorce. They were both immigrants. Well, the three of us are immigrants from Brazil. We moved to the US when I was about 4. And by the time I was 8, things really were not working out for them. What my mom didn't really know at the time was that my dad was certainly suffering from a mental illness. He never got diagnosed. He never took himself to get diagnosed. So
Sure,
it's a little hard for us to pinpoint what it was. But it led to a lot of domestic violence. It led to threatening of my mom's life. And it led to my dad coming up with a lot of stories, telling my mom that we were being deported from the US. And so we weren't, but this was a story he made, again, from his place of mental illness. And so we went back to Brazil for a little bit. And my mom recognized that she wasn't really safe and that her ability to have joint custody with him probably wasn't going to work out. So in a very, fearful, traumatized mental state, she moved us out of where we lived in Brazil to another area of the country and didn't let my dad know. So you can imagine now that a man with undiagnosed mental health issues, the state that would put him in.
Sure, absolutely.
And it eventually led to about 2 or 3 months of my mom and I kind of hiding out in a family member's house, of my dad finding us there. And just to give a little context here, I was really close to my dad. My dad to me was not a scary person. I was not aware of these.
I was going to say, you didn't see that part, yeah.
Oh, absolutely not. At 8 years old, especially, I was like daddy's little girl. I was so close to him. And, but my dad found where we were just as my mom and I were about to make another move. And he pointed a gun at me and at my mom to be able to take me from her. And I can recall that this was a scary situation.
Yeah.
But, as an 8-year-old going through something like that, you kind of black out.
You kind of black out, sure.
Yeah. And long story short, my dad was actually able to drive off with me, and we eventually ended up in Mexico under different names. I don't know how he managed to cross borders and have documents. But we ended up in Mexico, living actually in the beautiful coastal town of Puerto Vallarta. And for a little bit over a year, that is where I grew up, with a different name, a totally different life background, just a story that my dad shared that I would have to tell people the story. Yeah. And again, 8 years old, you don't really know, that this may be wrong or bad. All I knew is that I got to spend a lot of time playing at the ocean and at the river and catching tadpoles. So my best memories of childhood actually happen to be from this time.
From that time period, sure, right?
And I share that too, just to point out how complex childhood trauma can be.
Absolutely, yeah.
Meanwhile, for that almost year and a half that I was with my dad, my mom was, internationally going from Brazil to the US, working with different groups to try to find me. So anybody who's familiar with the Latin American channel, Univision, would have seen our story on there. They would have seen my pictures as a little kid on the television, newspaper clippings, the whole thing.
Wow.
So a downstairs neighbor from where my dad and I lived actually happened to see that special on the TV, contacted the group, and I believe it was a church group that was with my mom that they then came. They started to do some reconnaissance work. They came to my school, and at that point, they basically did like a second kidnapping. They were trying to extract me from there.
Yeah. So
at this point, I'm, a little bit older than 9 years old, and I'm being kidnapped the second time.
Yeah.
This time from who I think are strangers, but I start to recognize it's my mom. The police actually pull them over. We don't make it to the airport. And it just opens up this entire international crisis. And so it's, that there was a lot here that happened.
There's a lot there, yeah.
In a short amount of time.
And that's not even like really looking at the fact that like, yes, you're with your dad, but like, where is your 8-year-old, 9-year-old mind at as far as the fact that mom's not there, like that, and it's still a crucial time period, right? For that development.
Absolutely. And, at 8, when we left the US, I left the home that I knew, the school that I went to, the dog that I had. So it was a huge loss. And then being in Brazil, again, a huge loss. And then being in Mexico. And the U.S. actually called my parents back here to the U.S. to settle this court case, this custody battle. So it was another time losing my home, my friends. So there was a lot of loss at that young age. And by the time we came back to the U.S., the courts decided that with my dad's mental state and some of those really poor choices that he made, wild across a couple of countries, it gave my mom full custody, and that did not land well with my dad at all. He threatened to take my mom's life. He threatened to kidnap me again, and no matter what the courts asked of him or the opportunities that they gave him to stay in my life and in our lives, he, again, from a mental illness place, he was just really dead set on him being right, them being wrong.
Shutting all those doors in the process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, the choice between go to therapy so that I can see my daughter, or continue fighting the courts because I'm right.
Yeah.
And it's taken me a lifetime of really sitting with that and going through the grief, the anger, the understanding, the compassion of of somebody being in that position. Because he was, in that mental state of being violent towards my mom, basically the court said, you guys need to hide, you need to disappear. We're going to give you guys new names. We're going to put you in some domestic violence shelters to keep you safe. We're going to move you out of town. And for about 2 years, my mom and I moved around Seattle, in the Seattle area, staying at multiple domestic violence shelters. And, it was quite the experience. I can say that in a lot of ways, it very positively shaped who I am. The past 13 years of my career, I have spent helping other people who have gone through trauma. And I can relate to their stories. And so when somebody has a big story to tell me, I'm not scared to hear it. I've been there. So I've taken all of this trauma and tried to make something good of it. But yeah, it was about 20 years of my mom and I moving around a lot. She was eventually able to get on her feet, start her own small business. We didn't have to live in shelters anymore. She was able to put me through college. I was the first person in my family to go to university. So, she really turned things around.
Yeah.
But we lived in constant fear that my dad would find her. We had to change our names. We had to stay in hiding. We couldn't tell people where we were from or what our background was. So I grew up in that mindset of sharing things that are personal to you equals danger.
Equals danger, yeah.
And it did. So once my father passed away, he passed away back in 2017. Also a very tragic story for another time.
Another day.
But when he passed away, a lot of emotions came up. But one that I think could be uncomfortable or hard for people to hear was a massive sense of relief. There was a lot of loss.
Sure.
I had a lot of grief that we would never be able to repair things. But finally, my mom and I weren't going to have to live in fear anymore.
Yeah.
My legitimate fears growing up were, is my dad going to kill my mom? That's not a normal thought that an adolescent should have to experience.
Yeah.
And yet those were the cards we were dealt.
Yeah.
And so when he
and a persistent fear too, I mean, I don't have any good example, and it's always going to just constantly come off as like judgmental to like a situation or a stereotype. But I feel like a lot of times when you hear some version of that story, that individual or one of those individuals that's causing that fear doesn't pass away, but they're arrested for what they've done, and like at least know that like that's where they reside, and maybe you have that fear they're going to get out one day or not based on whatever sentence. But here's like a persistent, perpetual run. Yeah,
absolutely. 20 years of running.
Yeah.
And that's certainly how my mom would describe it too, is that we've all been on the run.
Yeah.
And so to get the privilege of doing things like getting to settle down, getting to build deeper relationships, to me, once my dad passed, it opened up all of these opportunities to get to live a little bit more like other people.
Yeah.
To not worry if I'm with a partner and my dad pops into the picture again, am I putting them in danger?
In danger, yeah.
Am I going to have to leave school and leave my job and hide again? So, again, it's been about 5 years now since he passed. And it's been a really beautiful blossoming time for me to again, getting to share things like this. getting to share with certain friends who have known nothing about my
Yeah.
story, pieces of it.
Know you, but know nothing at the same time.
Friends that know me but have known nothing. And of course, there's the people that I'm the closest to that they know this story, and they know
Yeah.
it because I know that they can hold it.
Yeah.
I know that they can be tender with it. So this is me working on sharing more of my story and just holding that tenderness myself.
Yeah. What, so being somebody that, like, I could say I have a great understanding of like adolescence and like child development and things like that. Certainly not perfect, but at least aware enough that like that time period, and even now, right? I mean, that's all about figuring out who you are, from the mistakes to the great parts to, figuring out what your parents mean in that picture. And to some degree, you could call this like like a child of divorce, but like not really, because you don't even get to be yourself in that moment, So it's like, yeah, you get to figure out, maybe who you are inside, and maybe this correlates to, what you do now. So you can talk about that. But how does that navigation look, as somebody that now gets to open up and figure out who they are, versus somebody that, may have traumatic situations as a child, but they also get to be themselves at the same time, whereas you didn't. How does that, what does that course look like?
Yeah. I think that what worked for me is that I've always been very introspective. So you can imagine that, by age 8, I grew up very quickly and
Yeah.
recognized very quickly that I needed to maybe do some adulting and managing of other people's emotions, reading other
Yeah.
people's moods. But what it also led to was this deep sense of connection to myself internally.
Yeah.
I think I recognized that, okay, well, if my outside world is constantly changing, and if my outside world isn't necessarily reliable, there's got to be some form of foundation here.
Yeah.
Children look for consistency, they look
Right.
for grounding. And so I can remember as a little kid, specifically in Mexico, we had this balcony, and I would look out at, I don't know if I was looking at a star or at a planet, but I would look out at this bright thing in the sky. And I could probably see it now as meditation. Back then, I felt like I was, maybe talking to like guides or grandparents. And
Yeah.
I kind of externalized this nurturing parental figure
Yeah.
outside of me, so that I could carry that reassurance around with me. Not ideal for a kid to go through.
No, right.
But how it has served me as an adult is I can sit down and be with myself really easily.
Yeah.
I do a lot of inner child work, not only with others, but I do it with others because I've done it with myself for so long. And I go in and basically try to reparent her. I go back into the situations where the little me felt scared, alone, unsure. And I go in, I create a space that's safe for her to express herself. And I give myself a lot of opportunities to be in that childlike state, whether it's through dancing or making art, or just being very silly.
Yeah.
So I didn't get to be myself publicly, but I got to be myself with myself.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it sounds simple, but it's probably just our mind's way of kind of coping with the situation. But to navigate that and be able to do that with grace, like you seem to be doing, it just shows a lot of resilience for what we are as humans. Given traumatic situations that could easily shut you down. Because I mean, not only are you lost who you are in the process because you weren't given a nurturing environment to do that, you're also not sure of where your parents are in that situation. Like you said, I mean, it came with a lot of relief, when your father passed, and I can absolutely understand that and see the same thing happening if that were to me. Yeah, but at the same time, I think the overwhelming feeling would be that, well, wait a minute, I don't know exactly who you are, and what did that mean? Like, did you? Because I could see them saying that, right? That I kidnapped you because I loved you, or I did this, and so you don't get to ask those questions in this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had to work out those questions and those emotions a lot myself through
Yeah,
journaling, through Reiki, through therapy, through hypnotherapy, through all of the different
yeah,
tools that I use to navigate these challenging situations, because I won't be able to ask him those
yeah,
questions. And that is where the grief lies, is
yeah,
in
sure,
that, there's the 8, 9-year-old me who lost her dad, who never really got a chance to grieve that.
yeah,
There was 29-year-old me who physically then, or,
yeah,
from this early realm, lost her dad. And so even a couple of months ago, on the anniversary of his death, I always take time to really just be with myself. I take the day off, or I don't make plans with anybody, and I just give myself time to grieve whatever kind of complicated grief
yeah.
is coming up.
What would you say is the biggest thing though that you've learned from all this? As you piece by piece, little by little, day by day, go through the story in your mind of what happened. As you mentioned, this when you're young like that, yeah, you remember it, but you don't really understand the impact and the severity of it until it comes back. And for some of us, those are things that you later learn that you pushed aside. What's kind of been the most challenging thing to look back at, and what has been the thing that's kind of kept you moving forward?
Yeah. You used the word resilience, and I look at my story as a story of resilience, and
Yeah,
that we can go through some really horrific things in life. We can go through massive loss, and that does not need to define us.
yeah,
I I really love my life right now. And I've loved my life actually for a long time, right? I think having lost so much as a kid, it gave me a lot of appreciation for
yeah,
everything good that I did get to have. Um, I love who I am as a person. I love that I can connect with others and understand others. I love that you can throw me in any country and I will sort it out.
yeah,
I have not faced a challenge that I wasn't able to rise up to. So
yeah,
that is the good that has come from this, right? We
yeah,
are resilient beings. Our past does not define us. Our past does not have to dictate what our future looks like. And I think the loss, and this is something that I've been exploring a little bit more this past year, is now I'm starting to look at the grief of the little girl who didn't get to have hobbies,
yeah,
or school friends that she grew up with, or a hometown. And I know a lot of people who have moved around a bunch, they don't have those kinds of roots. Um, but I had never given myself time to really grieve that before.
yeah.
And so I think one of the more challenging things that at least has been in my view lately has been that
Is
this
that
little girl, yeah, she didn't get to develop roots. And so I do things now to give her the opportunity to develop those more deeply.
beautiful? Well, thank you so much for sharing all that.